tell you, I'm going to take you through the intro everywhere. That is great, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the warm welcome, and as I was explaining, I met with some of the local elected officials and legislators for just a couple minutes before I came in. This is my 10th trip to Danville as governor, and there will be many more, but I tell you, I always feel such a warm welcome anytime I come, and so that makes me want to come back more and more, and I thank you all for that. Let me start off, before I get into the topic of the day, transportation, just by doing a couple of housekeeping things and a few other things. First, to you for being here. Today's the day I know there are a lot of graduations and Saturdays. Everybody's got a million things to do. So the fact that you can come out in the afternoon on Saturday, I very much appreciate it, because this will be helpful to the dialogue on a very important topic. You heard some kind of housekeeping announcements. I have some folks from state government outside, constituent services, and the Treasury office. If you have just constituent services. So if you either have a question that you don't get a chance to ask because my voice runs out and the hands are still up, or you don't want to ask in front of a group, if you've got a problem with state government you're trying to work with, go to the constituent services table outside and they'll try to help you. Second thing is just a little bit of a congratulations. The Danville area has been the subject recently of some really great stories about your economic resiliency. A wonderful article at the head of the business section of the Richmond Times, and a front page article in the Washington Post last Saturday about how Danville's community leaders are working together in a great way with those from Pennsylvania and other areas surrounding to really create some economic renaissance here. And that is truly an accomplishment that the community can be proud of. Much more work to do, obviously. We're all trying to work on it together, but I think you can feel very, very good about that. I'm here to talk about transportation, which is a big and challenging topic. It's a topic that has kind of vexed us policymakers in state government, legislators, governors for a number of years. It's one of the issues. I think transportation infrastructure and education infrastructure are like the two wings that help you take off, economically. And we've done some wonderful things on the education side, but we have had some challenges really squarely addressing the transportation challenges of the state since there was comprehensive work done to finance the system back in 1986. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about that need today. The need, both locally but also statewide. Then a plan that I have put forward before the legislature. I've called the legislature into a special session starting June 23 to try to find a resolution to some of these transportation issues, primarily financing adequate transportation going forward. When I called the special session on May 13th, 6 weeks before the session, I put out a plan with the full knowledge that legislators would look at it and find maybe some things they liked, but maybe find some things they didn't, but that it would be the beginning of a dialogue, and hopefully we could have a dialogue, improve it, but pass something. And my main, cry of urgency today is let's try to solve this. We can solve it. There's one of my favorite maxims in politics or life was a statement of Abraham Lincoln's that you can't avoid tomorrow's responsibilities by evading them today. They keep getting bigger and harder and more expensive, and I think the time to deal with these issues is now. And so with that, let's jump right in. Let's talk first about some of the challenges we have. Maintenance needs. We have the third largest state-maintained road system in the United States. So the system is big. The system is also growing. About 250 miles a year of new roads are taken into the system. Every time local governments approve a subdivision, when the subdivision opens, the state normally takes over maintenance responsibilities. So we grow in the system. The system is also aging, just like everything else. Aging infrastructure requires more care and attention. So it's big to start with. It's growing and it's aging. On the aging side, just a kind of interesting tidbit. How many bridges do you think we have in the Commonwealth of Virginia to maintain? Let's just shout out a guess.
2,000.
2,000, okay. Keep north of that.
15.
15, a little bit north of that, 20,000. There are 20,000 state-maintained bridges. Now, a lot of them are small. Sometimes you don't even know you're driving over a bridge when you're driving over a bridge, but we have 20,000 bridges statewide, and the average age of a bridge in Virginia is 47 years. Now, that's our average. That means a lot are older than that. And usually when something like a bridge gets to about 50, you have to start figuring out ways to repair or really replace. 1,700 of the state's 20,000 bridges are called structurally deficient. What that means is they were built for vehicles that are different than the vehicles that we drive today. Usually weight limits are so much different. And so on those 1,700 bridges, we have to inspect them more often. We have to put weight limits on them. We have to make plans to repair them. Just as I was going around talking about this maintenance issue, one day earlier this week, we had a bridge collapse in Giles County, where we had posted it at 8 tons because it was built in 1932, wasn't built to today's trucks. Guy drove a cement truck across it, ignored the sign, and it collapsed. He was not badly injured, thank goodness, but that's just an example of, aging infrastructure. They need care. So that's our maintenance need. Large system, growing and aging. There is one more feature, which is construction costs have been going up dramatically. So the cost of the materials, steel, cement, asphalt, to repair and replace our infrastructure has been really going up. We've been relatively low inflation economy for a while, but not in construction costs. So yeah, costs have increased. And then this last point, it reduces funds available for improvements. Let me just tell you real quickly what that means. In the transportation budget of Virginia, we kind of have two pieces. We put money into, there's certain revenue sources we put into maintenance, and there are other revenue sources we put into construction. So new construction or new infrastructure. Beginning in about 2000, the money we put into maintenance wasn't enough to maintain the system. So the legislature, right at the end of the Gilmore administration, gave the governor the ability to go into the construction fund and pull out construction money to make sure we had enough to maintain. And the rationale for that was a good one. Let's maintain first. Let's not short maintenance for safety reasons. So what happens is, for the last number of years, the governor has been going into the construction account and taking money out for maintenance. That is something we call the maintenance deficit. The maintenance deficit in the next year in the state's budget, the year that starts July 1, we run a July 1 to June 30 fiscal year, will be about $375 million. We have to take that much out of the construction account to maintain what we have. And it is scheduled to grow, projected to grow, to nearly $600 million by 2014. Next slide. This shows you kind of that effect. This is a chart showing the maintenance and construction budgets for transportation in Virginia over about nearly a 30-year period. In 1988, you'll see the red dot was current construction. The red bar is construction, the gray bar is maintenance. We were actually doing more construction than we were maintenance. That was in 1988. And you'll see that the maintenance monies in red kind of increased, but in about 2011, they start to decline very dramatically. We just put, last year, the legislature and I worked together to put $3 billion of bonded capacity for new construction into the system, and we are doing that. But even with that, you'll see that the construction radically declines as maintenance costs continue to climb, and that's because maintenance starts to eat more and more out of the construction account if we don't do anything, if we kind of leave things where they are now on the revenue side. So that is the first aspect of the statewide need, is just maintain what you have. That's getting more and more expensive. It's taking money out of construction. There is a safety aspect of maintenance that I know you're familiar with. So poorly maintained roads can create more accidents. We had over 1,000 people die on the road last year in Virginia, which is the first time that had happened for a number of years. Now, a lot of deaths on the road are because of people's behavior, but the condition of roads affects this. There was a young woman, I was in Charlotte about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and a young woman right about to graduate from Albemarle High School was driving on Route 29 and was hit by a truck and killed. And it was in an intersection that had been one of these ones perennially on a list to improve because there were some sight line and vision aspects of this intersection that were problematic. And so having money to maintain does help safety. In areas of the state that are really congested, having better transportation gets emergency vehicles to and from your house quicker. That helps. I was on the ambulance authority board in Richmond when I was on our city council, and I learned stuff that really surprised me. Just the difference in 1 minute of getting an ambulance to somebody who's got a cardiac problem makes a big difference in their likelihood of surviving. And in rural Virginia, paved versus unpaved roads. Having roads that are paved makes it easier for emergency vehicles. Unpaved makes it tougher. And then finally, maintenance. I think this is a picture we're probably familiar with, aren't we? Isn't that Danville? Boy, a long time ago. Okay, so that's an aerial view of some of the bridges. And you've got the Robertson Bridge issue that I know that has been discussed. So maintenance helps also deal with just, the daily travel back and forth and making life a little bit more easy. Next slide. Here's what's happening to the transportation budget right now for a variety of reasons. The Commonwealth Transportation Board is the state's planning agency that does transportation planning. And the way they do it is they have a rolling 6-year plan. So there's always a 6-year plan that they're working with. This is what we're going to do over the next 6 years. And they divide the state up into CTB districts. We are in the Lynchburg district. So each district has construction projects and maintenance projects. But what we're seeing is every April the CTB has to look at the plan and decide where it is. This past April, the CTB reduced the 6-year plan by $1.1 billion because of the combined effect of a number of things. We did work together last year on a transportation bill, and the legislature in a historic way stepped forward and said, yeah, we do have to invest more, and I worked together with them. But two aspects of the bill that were pretty important are now no longer in existence. There were regional plans for Hampton Roads in Northern Virginia that were struck down by the Supreme Court in February. And then one of the things we did was something we called the abusive driver fee, which was let's ticket DUI and reckless driving offenders, charge them high prices, use those money to maintain the roads. The people told us after that was in place, hey, nice try, we want to fix transportation, not that way. So we repealed that. We listened and repealed it. But the repeal of those two pieces of the bill last year and some reductions in other revenues. Every time gas goes up, people will drive a little bit less, so gas tax revenues decline. This means that the 6-year plan has had to be reduced by $1.1 billion. What does that mean to this area? The state construction for primary, secondary, and urban roads has been reduced by about 40% in the CTB's draft plan, which they put out the draft in April. They're scheduled to approve it later this week. So an awful lot of projects, and I'll show you the kind of precise project map at the end of this presentation. An awful lot of projects in this area that were slated to be done in the next 6 years are either now delayed or they're just completely off the list. And we'll talk a little bit about what some of those projects are, and that's happening all over the Commonwealth. Next. So that's one set of needs. Let me talk about the least popular thing I'm going to talk about, which is taxes. Because taxes, revenues, fees, always tough to do, always tough for a legislature or a governor to do. And look, it's a tough time right now. It is a tough time economically. And yet I am really struck with this issue of how do you grow your economy if your transportation infrastructure isn't what it ought to be. That's a challenge. We want to not have doldrums. We want to lift off. And transportation is very connected to that, just as a good education system is. So let me tell you about taxes in the state. We're 5th in the nation in per capita income. Now, of course, that doesn't mean everybody's doing well. Doesn't mean every region's doing well. There's wide disparities region to region. But we are, relative to other states, we're a fairly high per capita income state. At the 12th biggest population. We're 32nd in state and local tax burden in the country, and 39th in taxes as a percentage of income. We're 36th as spend on state spending side. So we are a state that has a relatively high income and a relatively low tax and expenditure side compared to other states. Hey, I like that. I think we want to be there. We want to be high on the income side, low on the taxes side. But that creates some challenges for us if we have to decide that we need to invest and the taxes are low. That can create some difficulties in finding out, okay, well, what's the strategy that we need to use? All of this kind of comes down to the final point. We rank near the bottom when it comes to what percentage of our income we put into transportation infrastructure, and that's one of the reasons we're having a challenge. Let me show you a little bit about the money that we use for transportation. There are 3 primary taxes or fees in Virginia that are used to fund transportation. The first one is sales tax on autos. The second one is the general sales tax, and the third is the gas tax. Those are the 3 revenue sources that we use overwhelmingly to fund transportation in Virginia, and most states use the same 3. There are some other, the registration fee through DMV, that's one too, but that is a very small piece of what we do. These are the 3 biggies, and they're the 3 biggies in other states as well. So what I want to do is I want to show you in Virginia where we are compared to other states. Motor vehicle sales tax rate. If you buy this is a 5% sales tax, right? If you buy a pencil, if you buy a computer, if you buy anything, we have a general 5% sales tax rate. But the sales tax on auto is 3%. So we set the sale, we're trying to find transportation revenue, but we've set the sales tax on autos 2% less than the general sales tax rate. The national average, you'll see here on sales tax on autos, is about 4.6%. And the states that are 3% or less are in blue, and you'll see there's only about, we're kind of like in the bottom 10 states in the way we set the auto sales tax. Well, if we were just at the national average, if we said, let's just snap our fingers, we're at the national average, instead of 3%, we're at 4.6%, what would we have for transportation that we don't have now? That difference would be somewhere between $300 and $350 million a year that we would have for transportation if we were at the national average. But we've decided to set it below the national average. That's the first revenue source. Next one, the general sales tax. We're at 5% in Virginia. Again, if you look at the blue states, these are the low states in the country where sales tax is set low. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6 or 7 states like Virginia that are 5% or less, and 40 plus states that are higher. The average is at 6%. That's the average sales tax, 6.02% in the United States. What if we had a 6% sales tax? If we had the average sales tax, what would that mean revenue-wise? We would have about $1.2 billion a year more in revenue if we were just average. But we've made a choice. We've set the sales tax a percent below average. And finally, and this is kind of the big one, this is the one that is the most significant piece of funding transportation, because on the sales tax side, that's a big revenue source, but we just put a piece of it into transportation. The big funder of transportation is the gas tax. This chart shows you the federal plus state gas taxes in every state. And the federal tax is even across states. So the variation between the states is because states set it differently. And you'll see there's probably 15 states that are less than 40 cents, and Virginia is one. It's 37.7 cents. Of that, 17.5 cents is the state portion. The national average is nearly 46 cents. So the national average, and that difference in the average is because the difference is of the state taxes, not the federal tax. So our difference in our state tax compared to national average is about 8 cents a gallon that we're charging less than the national average of other states. If we charged a gas tax that was the national average, what would that mean? If it was just snapped our fingers 8 cents more, that's between $400 and $500 million that we would have if we just set it at the national average, but we've chosen to set it below the national average. So just the combined effect of these, you set auto sales tax below the national average, 300 to 350 million below. We set sales tax about $1.1 billion below the national average, and then we set gas tax 450, 500 million below the national average. That's a lot of revenue that we could be using for transportation. If we were at average, we've chosen not to be, and we're below. Here's how they all combine together. What do we spend when we combine all of those together as a percentage of income in Virginia? Well, the national average is to spend about 1.3% of your income. There's about 5 or 6 states that are spending significantly less than that. We're spending 1.1%. I just went through those slides pretty quick, but there's just sort of a simple, point to them, which is you can have a really good system if you pay for it. You can have kind of a mediocre system if you pay for that. But you can't have a really good system by paying the mediocre. There's just a law of math about this, where if we make a policy choice to set everything a lot lower than national averages, there's nothing we can do to just suddenly wake up and say, but we should have an excellent transportation system. So part of the debate about transportation, I think, is just kind of a recognition of, do we want to complain or do we want to do something? And if we want to do something, we sort of have to just face it and say, we can't set all the revenue sources so much less than others and expect to have a great system. So let's move beyond the tax issue, and I'm going to start now talking to you about what's my proposal. Let me begin by saying it isn't all about money. It's not all about money. The legislature in the last 2 years especially, 2.5 years, has really done some good work in a couple of areas that I want to highlight before I talk about my money proposal. First, we got to do a better job of coordinating land use and transportation planning. And I see local officials know exactly what I'm talking about. Virginia has had an odd system where local governments make the land use plans, but the state has done the transportation planning, at least with respect to counties. And you can see, I'm not a transportation engineer, but you can immediately see the problem with that. If the localities are making land use decisions, but all the transportation planning is being done at the state level. Those need to be combined because every land use decision has an effect on transportation. So in the last couple of years, the legislature has done a whole lot of bills and strategies to try to better combine land use and transportation planning. That is a very important part of this, especially in the parts of the state that are congested. Very important part. The next thing, it's also about trying to use money the right way. When Mark Warner was elected governor, he was concerned that everybody was complaining about VDOT. In fact, I remember when Mark was running for governor, so many of you know Mark well, it always struck me, the one line of his speech that always got a lot of applause when he was running for governor was when he was bashing VDOT. And he got a lot of applause. So people had concerns about VDOT, and when he became governor, he dug into it and found that in 2002, in the VDOT projects statewide, they only completed projects on time 25% of the time, and only on budget about 50% of the time. And obviously that was abysmal. So we've worked very hard with VDOT, and the VDOT folks have really gone after this to become much more accountable in what they do. We now have an on-time, on-budget percentage in excess of 85%. 6 years later, with 2,000 fewer employees, we've really tried to strategically downsize VDOT so we can take the salary money and turn it into pavement and bridge replacement rather than salary, and do that better. And we've been able to make a lot of improvements. We should wake up tomorrow and find more improvements to make. I mean, I think this is something where every day we should try to be getting better, but there have been significant efforts to improve the performance of the state's road design agency. The third thing we do, it is a little bit about money, but not about taxes. Part of the solution, particularly when you're building new roads, part of the solution is figuring out ways to finance roads differently than just the gas tax or the auto title tax. So Virginia has been one of the leaders in the nation in what we call public-private partnerships. Concessions is another word for it. It's basically tolling, or usually tolling, for a new road. And these are some projects that are up on the board where we're using some private financing, not straight tax financing, some private financing, usually through tolls or some other mechanism to try to do infrastructure improvements. You'll see that a lot of these projects up here, there are a couple in Western Virginia, but most of them are in the metropolitan areas, the Richmond area, Hampton Roads, or Northern Virginia. And the reason for that is, if you're using tolls, it's easier to do it on roads that just carry high volumes of traffic. The lower the volume, then the higher the toll has to be, and then people don't want to drive on it. But in some of the places where there's really high volumes, that tends to be a place where you can use tolls and use them effectively. And so that is something that we're trying to do as well. Okay, well, let me get on to the proposal that I have laid on the table for the legislature. I'm going to tell you what it is, what it does, and why I have done it the way I have done it. It's got three pieces. It's safety first, dealing with the maintenance issue. It's regional improvements in the two most congested parts of Virginia, Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. And then it's transportation change. The world is changing with $4 a gallon gas. And so we have to think about transportation, I think, a little bit differently than we did when it was $1.50 or $2 or even $3. So let me jump in first. Safety first. I've talked about the maintenance issue. You've got, accidents on the road. You have this big infrastructure that we need to repair. One other thing that is an important safety first issue that I mention a lot in Hampton Roads is we know we're going to need to evacuate Hampton Roads for a hurricane. We're sure we will. It might be this year, or it might be 25 years from now. But this is one of the things that they scare you with when you get elected governor. They bring you to the Emergency Operations Center about a week after Election Day, and they say, okay, now we're going to brief you on all the things that could really go horribly wrong with your governor. And tell you what plans we've done. And the Hampton Roads one was the one that really frightened me the most. We've got 1.6 million people who live in the Hampton Roads area, and 700,000 of them live in ways where they're very vulnerable to storm surges. If there were to be a Category 3 hurricane, for example, that we need to evacuate. And we just don't have the road capacity to evacuate 700,000 people in an orderly way. If nobody has a flat tire or runs out of gas, it takes 40 hours. Well, people are going to have a flat tire run out of gas. And so what we really need to do in Hampton Roads is do a dramatic improvement of the quality of Route 460 west out of Hampton Roads for hurricane evacuation. That's an example of a kind of project that is really a safety issue. So what's my proposal? I have a proposal to fix this maintenance deficit that I described earlier, so that we won't have to go pull money out of the construction account. When you do that, that's not a good way to maintain, because instead of having an orderly way to maintain, you're kind of cobbling together maintenance money. And it also hurts your construction account, because you're draining all the money out of the construction account by doing it. And my proposal on the maintenance deficit is to do two things. One, to increase the annual vehicle registration fee that we pay by $10. So $10 a vehicle, we would increase it. And the second thing I would do is I would take that sales tax on autos that I described earlier, that's at 3%, and I'd raise it to 4%. So we'd still be less than the national average. But if we increase the registration fee by $10, and then we increase the auto title tax from 3 to 4, and then we put all the money for auto title and the registration fee, we just put it all into the maintenance fund, we would not have a maintenance deficit. What you'll see is, this is that maintenance deficit as it's growing. I mentioned that in this fiscal year is 09, it's nearly $400 million. It grows to nearly $600 million if we don't do anything. If we do what I have just proposed, it's actually positive. We don't have the deficit. 2014, out of ways, it starts to go a little negative again, although the projections, the farther out you go, the hazier they get. But it would be 50 million, not 600 million, which is obviously a heck of a lot better. Why do I propose to use those two revenue sources to fund the maintenance deficit? First, they're both related to transportation, auto title tax and the vehicle registration fee. But the other reason I decided to, when I was putting this plan together, I didn't just want it to be, hey, here's the bright idea that Tim Kaine had. I wanted to try to really show that I was listening to people and the legislature especially. Last year, the legislature passed this bill that the Speaker put together, a very far-reaching bill. Some of it was struck down by the Supreme Court, but all the legislators voted on this bill ultimately, and it was overwhelmingly supported by legislators from both houses and both parties. It was very bipartisan in that way. The bill included a $10 registration fee increase and a 1% auto title tax increase. Now, they were included just for Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, not statewide. But they were in the bill. The legislature voted for it overwhelmingly. I thought, okay, that's at least a revenue source that the legislature has thought about and has expressed some willingness to use for transportation. So that's why I decided to use those for this maintenance problem. The second issue. I'll just be quick about this. I said safety first, let's maintain what we have. The second one is regional relief. Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads really have intense congestion problems, as you know. The plan that I favored when I came to be governor, I've actually been here talking about transportation before. This is one where it's kind of like the albatross on my, hanging on my neck. I keep trying to solve it, and I just haven't figured out the right way to do it yet, I guess. But my original idea was a statewide plan where we just raise money statewide and allocate it back to various jurisdictions. In Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, the legislators said, though, and I can see their point. They say, look, we often raise money in our jurisdictions, but then the money is spent elsewhere in the state. That makes us nervous. We've got these tremendous congestion problems. We would really like to be able to raise money right here and keep it right here, and also decide what the project should be, rather than having Richmond tell us what the project should be. And that was a feature of the bill that passed last year, so that wasn't my original idea, but the legislature had that as an idea, and I can understand why there would be that concern in these congested areas. So the second piece of my plan is regional improvements in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. So it would be regional taxes raised in those regions, and the money would be kept in those regions. I won't spend too much time talking about it, but basically the legislature last year passed a plan that raised $200 million a year in Hampton Roads, $300 million a year in Northern Virginia. And that was part of that regional plan that the court struck down. But I basically just put a regional plan on the table, a 1% regional sales tax in each of those two regions. And the money would be put on and it would stay there. That would raise the same amount that was in the package last year. And it would provide significant congestion relief. One thing that I thought was pretty amazing, in Northern Virginia, 81% of people who work are experiencing congestion. There are some who probably buy a house, 2 blocks away or something like that, and so that's in the 19%. But 81% experience congestion. The average congestion in Northern Virginia is a 2-week vacation. the equivalent of a 2-week vacation sitting in traffic. And you know how frustrating that is. But now at $4 a gallon, it's not just frustrating. When you're sitting there, you know, just think of running your vehicle for 2 weeks at $4 a gallon. Oh, you know, who knows whether it will go higher. In Hampton Roads, they've costed it out. Cost taxpayers nearly $470 million a year in lost time or lost cost. Next slide. Okay, the third piece is transportation change. You know, as we were working on this, even, gosh, I just became governor 2.5 years ago, but the world has changed about transportation. And so, as I was talking to my team about this, it's like, well, we can't just sort of do more of what we've been doing without asking ourselves, do we need to be doing some things differently? Because all of these plans that we've had in place have been built on a certain set of assumptions, and one of them has been assumptions about the price of gas. And now all of a sudden gas is very different, and I'm sure you have a sick feeling in your stomach like I do that it's not really going to drop down very much. Traditionally, gas prices at the end of the summer go down a little bit. We'll probably see that, but I don't think any of us really are realistically looking forward and saying, by gosh, in 5 years, you know, gas will be back down to $2.50 or $3 a gallon. I think we're in a high gas price era that we're going to be in, you know, if not forever, at least until we produce a lot of other alternative fuels, so there's, you know, some competition there. So I think what we need to do is look at transportation and look at it a little bit differently. In particular, we need to do more with rail and with public transit. Every public transit system in Virginia, bus system, metro, the Virginia Railway Express, every paratransit system that gives rides to seniors or those with disabilities is seeing a dramatic increase in demand. And everyone in the United States is seeing a dramatic increase in demand. And Virginia has not traditionally been a big investor in public transit like some other states have, you know, probably because we were a predominantly rural state for so long that it wasn't like we were in New York or Boston building a lot of public transit. But now 65%, 85% of Virginians either live in a city or a suburban area. Only 15% of the state, or 15 to 20%, is rural in population. So the combination of the kind of suburbanizing nature of the population and rising gas means public transit and rail is really important. Rail is important to serve businesses. If we can put freight on rail, we take freight off roads, and that helps us deal with some of the congestion challenges. So, so there's a whole series of things, including, I have one here at the bottom that's a good one for Southside, telework. The Tobacco Commission, these legislators are very involved in the Tobacco Commission, spends half the money that we got from the big cigarette tobacco settlements on economic development in Southside Virginia. One of the things the Commission has been doing is broadband access to bring high-speed telecom here to Southside. And that's so that you can attract businesses here with high-speed telecom that otherwise might have to go to Northern Virginia or somewhere else. And we're getting businesses from Northern Virginia that they don't want to open up more places in Northern Virginia where there's congestion, where cost of living are high. They would like to open up businesses elsewhere in the state if there was good broadband, where we can encourage people to telecom. We're taking state offices now and not just centering them in Richmond, but we're putting them in other parts of the state if there's good telework or broadband access. Some of our state departments have over 50% of employees only in the office 4 days a week, but one day a week teleworking from home. And if we can do those things and keep people off the road a little bit, then that's also a strategy. So that's what this transportation change fund would do. I've set up a fund, and I'll tell you about the funding mechanism in a second. $140 million a year, 75% of it would go for rail or public transit. The other 25% would go for economic development, either improving the port, improving airports, or direct rail access to a business that wants to move to our area, or a highway interchange for a business that wants to move to our area. So it would be 75% rail and public transit, 25% economic development. How do I raise the money for that? This is the last piece of the financing I'll tell you about. It's the grantor's tax. Right now in Virginia, if you sell a piece of property, for every $100, there's a 10-cent tax that goes into the state's general fund to fund schools and healthcare and jails and prisons and everything else. I would propose to increase that by a quarter. And I would put that quarter per $100 into the state's transportation fund. And that would fund this transportation change fund I'm talking about. Why did I pick the grantor's tax? last year the legislature in this bill that I've been talking about, they voted overwhelmingly in favor of a 40-cent grantor's tax in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. Now, not statewide, it was part of these regional plans. But I thought, okay, again, the legislature wrestled with this plan, and they kind of liked the grantor's tax notion, at least for those regional plans. Now, instead of setting it at 40 cents, I said, let me just scale it back to 25, and I will put that in this transportation change fund. So those are the three pieces. Safety, fix the maintenance deficit. Regional relief just in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, and then transportation change fund. If we do what I have proposed, we can really make some headway. First, the transportation change fund dramatically expands what we're doing for rail and public transit around Virginia at a time when the demand is increasing. Next. Remember I showed you at the start that chart where construction was in red and it grows and then it starts to drop down if we don't do anything? If we do what I have proposed, or something that would raise the same amount of money, you can keep that plan up in a pretty good way. Keep that plan. You'll now see construction is up at the blue level, 1.5 billion, and then between 1 and 1.5 instead of down less than 5 million. So the construction monies that would be available would be very helpful. Next, let me show you what it does in this region. I mentioned that we divide the state up in these regions, and this area is in the Lynchburg district of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. This is a map, kind of a dot map of the 6-year plan for the Lynchburg district right now. Every dot on this map, whatever the color, was a dot that was on the 6-year plan before April. So these were all projects that were going to be done within the next 6 years in this district. In April, the CTB got together and they said, look, all these revenues are declining because the Supreme Court struck this thing down and other revenues are declining. So they had to change the 6-year plan for your area. And what they did is shown on this map. Any dot that is in green is a dot that's still on, that's a project that's still on the 6-year plan. If it's a yellow dot, it's a project that has been significantly delayed. If it's a red dot, it's a project that's off the plan. So you see there's a lot of red on there. All of those red dots were green dots, but in April they got changed to red because of declines in money in the construction account. We're pulling the construction money into the maintenance account, and then other things are moving away. So there's a lot of red on that map. If we do what I have proposed, let me show you what the map looks like. Now go back and forth a little bit, okay? And just keep doing it for a second. Now leave it right there. There are still some red dots on your map. There's a couple up around Lynchburg, one over in Pennsylvania. There's still some red dots because we are seeing, as gas prices go up, gas revenues decrease. And so that, that's going to happen. And there's some projects that are getting taken off the list. But every yellow dot, virtually, except a couple in the city of Lynchburg, get changed to green. And an awful lot of the red, the ones off the list get changed to green. Let me just give you a couple of examples. The Robertson Bridge is a bridge in Danville that was on the 6-year plan. It's not on the 6-year plan anymore. Widening Hamilton Boulevard in South Boston, Pennsylvania Avenue and Alta Vista, replacement bridges on routes 20, 29, 29, 460, 40, and 501. I have a whole list of projects up here that are off the list unless we do something. So let me just finish, and let's see, is that the last slide? Yeah, let me just finish and I'm going to open it up and take your questions. It's just very important that we do something. It really is. Because we're going to continue to really struggle on this transportation issue unless we decide to just basically kind of belly up to the bar and invest. And this project will get more intense because construction costs keep going up. So I have no doubt that at some point we will do something. But if we wait, we might do something, but the purchasing power of our dollar would have shrunk as construction costs are down. So let me close on an optimistic note. I would right now say the chances of us coming up with a solution, they might be 50-50. That we would come up with a solution or not. And I'm kind of an optimistic guy by nature. So, some might say it would even be less than that. But here's why I'm a little bit optimistic about this. This year in the legislature, we had one of the hardest years we've had for a long time on the budget because the revenues were very short. You guys are seeing this in families, businesses, local governments. Our revenue growth normally in Virginia is 7.5% a year. It's just 1% this year. 1.8% this year. But even in a really tight revenue time, we did a dramatic reform of the state's mental health system and put a lot more money into it by reprioritizing and cutting other things. We did a big advance on early childhood education. The legislature did a really good job of funding K-12 education. Did a historic package of investments in colleges and community colleges. The legislature dealt with some very thorny, big, tough issues this year, and Democrat, Republican, House, Senate came forward and said, we got to do this. So that tells me that if we want to solve this, we can. In fact, this is, kind of a bold assertion, but I really believe it. The only reason not to come up with a solution in the special session is more people don't want to solve it than do. Because we know what we need to know. We've been debating about this for a long time. And if we want to solve this, we can. Now, everybody has different ideas, and that's always one of the challenges in the city council or, in a legislature. We have to be willing to say, well, it doesn't have to be my idea. It could be part of your idea, part of mine, and we'll patch it all together. If we want to solve this, we can. Now, with that, what I'd love to do is just open it up and take questions or comments, and I'll just move around the room.